You're listening to Inside Israel Today with Gil Hoffman on the Land of Israel Network.
Hello and welcome to Inside Israel Today here on the Land of Israel Network on thelandofisrael.com. Broadcasting here from Jerusalem on a beautiful day in a heat wave here in the middle of March when it's snowing all across America. Isn't it wonderful to live here in Jerusalem? I'm very, very blessed. And I'm also very blessed because we're not going to elections in June. Yay! When I sat here in this chair to tape my show a week ago, I gave an impassioned plea to God that there would not be elections coming up in June. And I had no idea whether there would indeed be early elections. At that point, no one knew. And it felt strange doing a radio show that could be totally out of date by the time anyone listened to it. And there's not a lot of time between when I tape the show and when it's put online. But things here in Israel happen so fast. And that's the beauty of living in this vibrant democracy. Now, what happened that day was there was a concerted effort by a consensus in the Knesset from right to left to avoid these elections. Everyone had their own different reasons. Everyone had their own interests. And in the end, you had strange bedfellows working together. You had people in the Labor Party who have seen polls saying that in the next election they might get only 10 seats, who were very worried that going to elections now would be a bad thing for them. Working together with Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked from the Bayit Yehudi party all the way on the right, who said this is the most right-wing government that Israel has had, why get rid of it? Who said we're in the middle of doing reforms here, Bennett in the Education Ministry, Shaked in the Justice Ministry, why stop these reforms by going to elections? And what parties on the left, like Labor, and parties on the right, like Bayit Yehudi, had in common is that they both didn't want to do an election at the best time possible for Netanyahu. Netanyahu, it seemed at least to be in his interest to go to an election in June because it was immediately after ceremonies that are expected to be held in honor of Israel's 70th birthday and far away from any police recommendations to the Attorney General, resulting in any kind of recommendation by the Attorney General regarding the investigations of Netanyahu. And so it really seemed like Netanyahu was pushing to have elections happening in June. Now, this is where the narratives divert from each other, because Naftali Bennett on one side and people in the Labor Party on the other side will say, we forced Netanyahu to not have elections in June. We got enough people in the Knesset to say that they're not in favor of it, so you wouldn't have a majority to pass that in the Knesset. In fact, we've got a majority to have the elections, if they're moved up, to be held at the worst possible time for Netanyahu. Netanyahu's people say different. Netanyahu's people say that he never actually took a side, that he was taking preventative steps because he thought that his coalition partners were toppling him, and one can argue that that made sense. United Torah Judaism, the ultra-Orthodox party, and Victor Lieberman on the other side, who is a relatively secularist party that serves Russian immigrants, were going in opposite directions and going to extremes in a way that could have brought his government down. So Netanyahu was preparing for the possibility of early elections, but that he was totally fine with either possibility, with early elections in June or with his government lasting as long as possible. And so his people say the thesis that he was actually the one pushing for an early election, and even getting Litzman from United Torah Judaism or Lieberman from the Israel Beitenu party to push for elections, was absolutely wrong. The people close to Netanyahu say, actually, he does nothing politically impacted by the criminal investigations against him, that he is so absolutely convinced that he is innocent and that the Attorney General is going to decide to close all the cases against him, that he acts only based on what is good for the country and not based on what is good for him legally and politically. And now I can leave that to the readers to decide. That is a totally legitimate opinion, and I've not spoken to Netanyahu himself to find out if that's what he really believes or if it's just the people around him creating a narrative. But nobody knows what narrative is right. Nobody is there in Netanyahu's head. And even the people speaking on behalf of Netanyahu, I'm not sure they know either. He has not really been confiding in people lately. And I can understand why when people who he has confided in the past have turned against him and are working against him right now legally. So the result, regardless of what the intentions were, is actually perhaps wonderful for Netanyahu. He gets to continue to govern, to continue to advance his agenda. And that agenda is going very well for him. He had a very successful trip to the United States that happened to be overshadowed here by the efforts to initiate an election, but he had a very good meeting with the President of the United States, where they focused mostly on Iran. There are efforts that are being made right now to fix the Iranian deal. While Netanyahu has spoken more about nixing it, and so has Donald Trump. Yesterday, I spoke to Yuval Steinitz, one of the ministers closest to Netanyahu, who said actually fixing it and extending it is the right way to handle it. That means that that one of the main problems in the deal is that it ends in 8 years, and after that there's no requirement for Iran to continue to stop enriching uranium. So I think a very different way of looking at it, that Israel would actually want the deal not stopped, but extended, but improved and extended. And so that's what Steinitz, who was close to Netanyahu, said yesterday, and perhaps those were things that were discussed in the meeting between Donald Trump and Netanyahu. And over the last few days, there have been meetings in Brussels between European and American officials where the Europeans are basically giving in to Trump. They're saying, okay, we will push for Iran to have to enable inspections of the nuclear facilities. And we will put sanctions on Iran when it comes to their ballistic missiles and their regional aggression, which was not included in the initial Iranian deal that was signed in July 2015. So positive things are happening on Iran, on the issue that Netanyahu cares about so much. It's also going well for Netanyahu economically. That we've got new economic growth numbers showing consistent economic growth of 3.5%. Countries around the world would die to have such economic numbers. And at a time when the unemployment rate has down to 3.7%, could you imagine a country where the economic growth could surpass the unemployment? That just doesn't happen. Now, never mind that those unemployment numbers don't include ultra-Orthodox people who are not seeking work, just like unemployment numbers in America don't include those who are not seeking work. But that's still a very, very big deal. And security-wise, while things are still going very well, we've had some tragedies over these last few days. Yesterday was the funeral of Adiel Coleman, who was murdered in the old city of Jerusalem Sunday, in a stabbing attack. And then you had a terrible attack on Friday that killed 2 people. And we hope that this is not a new wave of terror. We know that the police are working hard to ensure that there will not be a new wave of lone wolf terror attacks starting. There is concern because there are incidents coming up. There's soon going to be a march of 1 million people, they claim, from Gaza to the border between Israel and Gaza to make some kind of statement about the conditions there that would potentially make Israel look bad. There are the incidents coming up in May that will be celebrated in Israel of the Americans officially declaring the consulate in Jerusalem an embassy. That would be an excuse by the Palestinians to start more terror attacks, and we hope that they don't do that. That would certainly not be in their interest. But meanwhile, the Palestinians are only increasing the attention that they have with the American administration. Mahmoud Abbas, called U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman yesterday a son of a dog, Ibn Kalb. That's awful. That happened as there was an event going on in Jerusalem, the 6th Global Forum for Combating Anti-Semitism, and there David Friedman was speaking. And there David Friedman reacted by basically accusing Abbas of anti-Semitism. How does this help the Palestinian people, Mahmoud Abbas? How does this make you look good to the world that you're calling a distinguished ambassador the son of a dog? This is burning bridges. This is not helpful to you in any way. And your people deserve to have so much better leadership than you or any of the other potential leaders of the Palestinians can provide. And I think the world is seeing more and more that the lack of any progress in any kind of diplomatic process is not because of Israel. It's certainly not because of Netanyahu, who has been willing to go and talk to the Palestinians for so long, has been working with the President of the United States on a peace plan. It's because of this kind of rejectionism and name-calling and immaturity from a man about to turn 83 years old. And I just hope that the world is getting it more and more and more. And perhaps we can see that, by the way, Netanyahu continues to be welcomed all around the world. And he will continue to be welcomed all around the world now that we know that the government has been extended. As for those investigations, I think the Attorney General is going to take his time. There's a lot going on with them. There's constantly new questions being raised, new people testifying, new delays for different reasons. The Prime Minister was supposed to be questioned under caution on Monday, and instead he did not go because he was not feeling well. He got strep throat from Yariv Levin, from the minister he was working with to solve the coalition crisis. And so he couldn't be questioned. Now we're hearing that there's going to be questioning on obstruction of the investigation as well. So, look, if you want to have the diplomatic, economic, and security successes that I've talked about continue, you've got to be hoping that Netanyahu overcomes these investigations. We hope that we don't see a second prime minister in a row be convicted. And I think that people, even if people aren't with Netanyahu politically, have to be hoping for the good of the country, that he makes it through. And I hope that they thought the same thing when Ehud Olmert, who had very different political views, was fighting for his own legal battle. We want Israel to look good around the world. And I'd like to end with this, the beautiful numbers that there were with a Gallup poll that shows that Americans are in favor of Israel more than ever, and that also Israel was, by a study taken every year, seen as the 11th happiest country in the world, while America has been falling and falling in that study every year. So I hope there continue to be good days ahead for the people of Israel. And now we're not going through an election that I think would bring a lot of people down, not just political correspondence. So this is the time to say thank you, God, for answering my prayers and for answering the prayers all around the world. Today, as we speak, they are taking the notes out of the Western Wall. They do that right before Passover. They do their spring cleaning of the wall. So there are a lot of notes that have been put in that wall over the last year from Donald Trump, Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, Mike Pence, Will Smith, plenty of other celebrities who've been coming to Israel lately. We hope that all of those prayers and the prayers of people you've never heard of, the average Joe that goes to the Western Wall to pray their heart out, we hope that they'll be answered. Stay with us. And we're back here on the Land of Israel Network, on thelandofisrael.com, where we have elections coming up. Wait a second, I just said in the first half of the show that there are no elections coming up, and then I'm thanking God for that. Wait a second. There are elections coming up on Thursday in the Meretz party, which is the party furthest to the left that calls itself a Zionist party. There are people in the party that don't call themselves Zionist, but the party itself is Zionist and proud of it, but it's at the left end of the political map. Can we be talking about a left-wing party in a positive way here on the Land of Israel Network, on the landofisrael.com? Absolutely. The Land of Israel Network is in favor of democracy, and the vibrancy of our democracy is one of the things that makes it so strong, and one of the things that makes it a selling point in Israeli public diplomacy and explaining people around the world how special the Jewish and democratic state is. And so Meretz was formed in 1992 when there were three left-wing political parties that decided to run together. One was named Mapam, which had been around forever. One was called Ratz, and the other one was called Shinui. And so Meretz means vigor. In the past, it has been a party of young people that is anti-establishment a bit and tries to make waves, be young and vibrant. And in recent years, it hasn't been so much. Meretz has been electing old leaders that can't really appeal to the younger audiences. They had for many years a woman named Shulamit Aloni, who was a very tough woman. I got to interview her many times. She was briefly our Minister of Education. She was a very anti-Orthodox, but very knowledgeable about the Torah. Was fascinating to talk to. And the same is true of her successor, Yossi Sarid, also very much an expert in the Bible, but very vigorous against the ultra-Orthodox. They both took over Meretz relatively old in age, and Zahava Gal'on took over a little bit younger, but now is not so young. And so she's decided to retire. And now the leading candidate is a woman named Tamar Zandberg, who's 41 years old. She was born exactly a year before me. And she is an impressive person who has very strong views that I think probably the majority of the people listening to this show would not agree with. But it's still nice to see the young people advancing who can make the political system more and more exciting. One of the issues that she's going to be promoting is making marijuana be legal, and there's been some success in that for medical purposes and for other commercial kinds of purposes, and we'll see how that will go. She's very much an environmentalist, has an environmental agenda, and she has an agenda in helping diaspora Jews make Israel more pluralistic. She does not pray. She is not a believer in God, but she does go to services because her partner, who's a male, goes to services all the time and is religiously traditional. And she attends the services of the Women of the Wall sometimes when they're making news, and she wants to help that cause. So, like I said, I don't think too many people here listening to this show would vote for Meretz, but it's important that we have this democracy going. The person running against her, there were 9 candidates originally, but more and more have been dropping out. The main candidate against her now is a fellow named Avi Buskila, who is a Sephardi Jew whose parents moved to Israel from Morocco. And people from Morocco tend to not vote for Meretz. They tend to vote for Likud. They tend to not be left-wing. They tend to be right-wing. And here, wouldn't it be interesting if you have Avi Buskila win this race, someone who's not an insider in Meretz the way Tamar Zandberg was, and if you have a son of Moroccan parents take over Meretz, just like you had a son of Moroccan parents and Avi Gabay take over the Labour Party, you could have both parties on the left be controlled by Sephardim, by people who tend to vote for the Likud. And That would definitely make the next election in Israel more interesting. Avi Buskila is, until recently, was the Secretary General of Peace Now. Peace Now was founded to put pressure on the government of Israel to make concessions. And that organization has been a total failure. It was founded in 1978, so they are having ceremonies this week to mark the 40th anniversary of its founding. And I'm wondering, what exactly are they celebrating? They haven't accomplished anything. There's no peace, and it's certainly not happening now. It was founded April 1st, 1978, so that anniversary is coming up. But at least we have a peace movement that shows the vibrancy of Israeli democracy. I wish we had that on the Palestinian side. I wish there was a Peace Now organization in Arabic. There's certainly been attempts to start that, and they haven't worked out because, in part, they haven't had the leadership there because they're led by a man that calls the ambassador of the United States to Israel the son of a dog. So I hope there are better days ahead for the Palestinians that deserve to have better leaders, and I hope that the vibrancy of Israeli democracy continues to be a source of pride. So follow closely that election coming up in Meretz on Thursday at jpost.com and on the Land of Israel Network if anybody else wants to talk about it on their show. And follow also closely the election that will not be happening, the general election that we have, thank God, avoided. So thank you for being a part of this show here on the Land of Israel Network, on thelandofisrael.com. Good luck with your pre-Passover cleaning. Next week's show is not going to be about politics. It's going to be about the holiday. Looking forward. Thank you very much. Bye.